people, what are the darkest secrets you know? Story 1. Last year, I found myself hospitalized due to COVID-19. I was placed on a ventilator for 3 weeks and put into a medically induced coma. During that time, I was resuscitated multiple times and came alarmingly close to death. Looking back, I have a dark secret. I wanted to die. I was in the midst of a painful divorce and battling severe depression. My world felt like it was collapsing, and there seemed to be nothing left worth living for. In some twisted way, I almost felt relief that a virus might take my life, a way out I didn't have the courage to choose for myself. I had accepted death, and I no longer had the will to fight. But everything changed during one night in my coma. The doctors didn't think I'd make it through until morning, so they allowed my family to come and say their goodbyes. My mom, who raised me as a single parent and has always been my rock, came into my room. Even in my unconscious state, I could hear her voice, full of love and hope. She called me a fighter, begged me to keep fighting, and told me how much she loved me. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Her words gave me the strength to choose life. From that night on, my condition slowly started to improve. The recovery process was long and grueling, and I'm still on that journey today. But without that moment, without hearing my mom's voice, I don't think I would have survived. I've shared with her how much her presence meant to me, but I've never told anyone just how close I was to giving up. If the hospital hadn't made an exception and allowed her to be there, I truly believe I would have let go. Story 2. One night, my childhood best friend came to visit me at my college dorm. He had plans to attend a party and bought cocaine and pills from some of the guys living on my hall. I remember being oddly impressed by how confident and charismatic he seemed while making these deals. Before he left, he asked me not to tell his mother about what he was doing, but to let her know he loved her in case something happened to him. At the time, I thought it was a strange thing to say, but I brushed it off, assuming he had just developed a darker sense of humor since we last spent time together. I ignored the warning signs and let him leave. We were supposed to meet up the next day, so I thought everything would be fine. But it wasn't. Later that night, he crashed his car, likely high and not wearing a seatbelt. He didn't survive. When his mother asked me what happened, I chose not to tell her the truth. I didn't want her to know about the darker side of his life. I wanted her to believe it was a tragic accident, free of the pain the truth would bring. To this day, I've kept that secret. I live with the guilt of ignoring the signs, but I've held on to my decision to protect his mother from the full story. Story 3. Years ago, when I was a teenager, I got a summer job at a grocery store. Coming from a poor family, I was desperate to help my mom afford food during the summer when we couldn't rely on school lunches. My mom made just enough to keep us from qualifying for food stamps, so every bit I could earn helped. If you've ever been poor, you know how tight things can get. The manager at the store was a complete jerk. 2 weeks into the job, he fired me for no real reason, saying, "I just don't like your personality." That was the first time we'd ever spoken. I broke down in tears, knowing my mom was counting on me to pay for groceries that week. When I told him that, he dismissed me as being dramatic. That day, when I got home, I realized I still had a roll of markdown stickers in my pocket. These stickers were used to discount expired items, and a plan formed in my mind. I copied the stickers onto sticky paper, and that summer, I bought thousands of dollars worth of groceries at a fraction of the price. Technically, I paid for the items at the self-checkout, always using cash, but I marked things like salmon fillets, racks of ribs, and expensive cheeses down to just a few dollars. I spread out my purchases across several stores to avoid suspicion, never buying too much at once. I told my mom that I'd received an academic scholarship, and that was how I was able to afford the groceries. She never questioned it. I never got caught, and I don't feel bad about it to this day. The statute of limitations has long expired, and in my mind, I did what I had to do to help my family survive. Story 4. When I was around 13 or 14, about 32 years ago, I joined a program called Explorers, which was part of the Boy Scouts. My troop worked alongside the local sheriff's department, giving us training and experiences that mirrored those of young police officers. We practiced first aid, shot at shooting ranges, rode along with officers, worked events, and even wore uniforms with handcuffs and radios. Every year, we had a weekend event at a National Guard base, sort of a boot camp. Kids from all over the state attended, ranging in age from 13 to 17. We stayed in barracks, sleeping in large rooms with rows of single beds, about 30 kids per barracks. At the time, I was a small kid, barely 48, and hadn't hit puberty yet. I was an easy target and got picked on a lot because of my size. One day, during a break, I found myself being harassed by a group of older boys. It started with just a few, but soon more kids joined in, and it felt like the entire room was focused on me. They pinned me down, dragged me to one of the beds, and handcuffed me. I fought as hard as I could, biting, clawing, and kicking, but I couldn't break free. The oldest boy in the group seemed to take charge, and they attempted to assault me with a broomstick. To this day, I don't believe they succeeded, though the details are blurry. I don't remember anyone coming to my aid. Maybe they got bored, or maybe someone interrupted. Eventually, it stopped. Moments later, everyone was getting ready for the next event as if nothing had happened. I never told anyone, not the officers, not my parents, not my wife. It's something I rarely think about, and I don't feel like it has defined my life. But as I type this now, I can feel a flood of emotions surfacing. This is the first time I've ever shared the story with anyone. Story 5. I once spent 2 years meticulously planning my exit. The idea was to disappear, cut everyone out of my life, move to another state, and wait until people stopped calling. Once I felt they'd moved on, I planned to take my life. The goal wasn't for people to grieve or miss me. I wanted them to think, good riddance. But my plan had a flaw: my mother. She never stopped checking on me. Every month, she would call and drive for hours to visit. No matter what, every conversation ended with her saying, "Remember, I need you around, and I'll always love you." Her words shattered my resolve like nothing else. Then, my best friend started calling me constantly, leaving voicemail after voicemail. Eventually, out of annoyance, I picked up. His first words were, "Finally, you expletive, let's catch up." From that point on, he called weekly just to check in. And then came the cat. My mom, concerned about my mental health, brought me a kitten, claiming it would be good for me. She also had me see a therapist and a psychiatrist who both suggested getting an emotional support animal. That cat changed my life in ways I never expected. One night, when I hit rock bottom, I started writing final letters to everyone I cared about. I poured out my apologies and goodbyes, but when I started writing my mom's letter, I broke down. I sobbed uncontrollably as I wrote about taking care of the cat. I cried until I fell asleep at my desk. I woke up to my cat gently tapping me, chirping for his breakfast. That moment pulled me back. I didn't go through with my plan. Today, that cat is still with me, and I love him more than anything. I'm a grown man who will drop everything to pet a cat because, to me, they're little angels. Nobody knows about this except my wife, my mother, and my therapist. It's my darkest secret and one of my most vulnerable memories. Story 6. When I was around 5 or 6, my mom had a friend with 2 kids of her own. Her children were a bit unruly, defiant, and malicious, but their mom wasn't the best parent either. One time, while visiting their house, the kids were acting wild. Eventually, they settled down and we started playing, but then, out of nowhere, they thought it'd be funny to run around naked. I was mortified, but I also felt something I didn't understand at the time. At some point, their mom caught them and dragged the older child, still naked, into the bathroom, locking the door. I could hear everything: the yelling, the crying, and the unmistakable sound of her hitting her child. When the child finally came out, she had bruises and a black eye. She quietly got dressed, and life went on as if nothing had happened. That moment stuck with me. It was one of my earliest memories and shattered my understanding of what a parent could do to their own child. Story 7. I come from a very large family. So large that even now, at 44, I don't know everyone. Back in high school in the early 90s, I had a normal teenage life. I met a girl on the swim team, and we started dating. After a few months, our relationship grew serious, and eventually, we became intimate. About a year into our relationship, she got pregnant with twins. We were excited but nervous. However, during the 8th month of her pregnancy, we discovered a shocking family connection. Her mother and my mother were first cousins, making us second cousins. This revelation sent our families into chaos. Everyone had an opinion and the division was intense. But by then, we were deeply in love. We decided to stick together and got married. Despite the challenges, we built a life together. We had a happy marriage for about 12 years, but as we grew older, we started drifting apart. Eventually, we divorced, but remained close friends for the sake of our daughters. I started my own business, bought her a house to live in with the kids, and got a home nearby. Even after the divorce, we co-parented with love and respect. Now, our daughters are adults, and they love both of us equally. We may not be married anymore, but we'll always be family. Story 8. You know those horrifying stories you hear about someone abusing a baby? I was that baby, and the abuser was my father. It wasn't just a one-time event. It happened throughout my entire childhood. Even worse, my mother knew. There were times when she walked in on it and simply turned around and left. She knew. We all knew. Unsurprisingly, I acted out as a child, which led me to therapy. The therapist was a family friend, and I told him the truth. He confronted my dad and offered to report it to the police, but also explained the consequences. I decided not to go through with it, and the abuse continued. The assaults only stopped when I was 11 after I finally told my father it didn't feel right. He would occasionally attempt things while drunk during my teenage years, and even apologize for what he'd done, but nothing changed. It wasn't until I met my wife and had my first child that I realized I had to cut ties with my parents to protect my son. When I confronted my mother, she looked me in the eye and, for the first and only time, said she loved me. Then, she told me she didn't believe me and that I should never come back. That was 5 years ago. Now, I'm living a life I never thought was possible. I have an amazing wife, the most perfect son, and a stability I never knew growing up. My father, a well-respected doctor, escaped accountability. I later learned he had abused his own brother, and I worry about the vulnerable patients he treated over the years. The abuse has left its scars. I struggle with PTSD and violent, sad dreams. Doctors say my early trauma likely stunted my amygdala development, leaving me prone to uncontrollable rage and anxiety. But I've worked hard to manage it, and despite everything, I've built a good life. I own my home, have a solid job, good credit, and, most importantly, a family that loves me. There are moments when I wish I had parents to turn to celebrate my achievements or seek advice from. But I've come to realize they wanted me to fail, so no one would believe me. So, to my parents, screw you. I'm thriving without you. Story 11. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, my best friend's mom passed away from cancer. She was such a kind woman, always volunteering at our school, and her death left a noticeable void. To honor her, the school held a small assembly for all the classes she had helped. One day, during recess, for reasons I can't quite recall, I got upset with my friend. I was angry and, in that moment, I said something I now deeply regret. I remember blurting out, "At least I have a mom." I don't remember how my friend reacted, but I know they didn't retaliate. We stayed friends for years after that, drifting apart as we naturally did when high school came around. Yet, that moment has haunted me. I've never shared this with anyone, not even my wife, because I feel an overwhelming sense of shame and remorse about what I said. It's a constant weight on my mind, and I often wonder how much hurt my words caused. Fast forward nearly 2 decades, and that same friend is now married to my closest friend. I went to their wedding, but it didn't feel right. I couldn't shake the guilt of those words I'd said so many years ago. I don't even know if they remember that moment, but I can't help but feel it still lingers in the air. My close friend once mentioned that their spouse never talks about their mom or anything related to her. It makes me wonder if my callous words are part of the reason why. That's something I'll carry with me forever. A reminder that sometimes words can do lasting damage that we can't always take back. Story 12. Halfway through my first year of university, I dropped out. The only people who knew were my closest friends. Instead of going back home, I decided to travel around Europe, taking up part-time jobs to fund my adventures. For the next 3 years, I lived a carefree life, coming home only during holidays and keeping up the pretense that I was still in school. When it was time for graduation, I told my family I'd earned a degree in IT. They were thrilled. I was the first in the family to attend university, and no one thought to question it. I even went so far as to put the fake degree on my CV, claiming I didn't attend the graduation ceremony. When I applied for my first job, I relied on the bits of knowledge I'd gained during my short time at university and my natural ability in the field. I nailed the interview, using the right buzzwords and exuding confidence, convincing them that I was a top-tier candidate. Not once did anyone ask to see proof of my degree. I worked hard, learning what I needed on the job, and over the next 5 years, I climbed the ranks. By the time I was applying for another position, I had enough experience to remove the fake degree from my CV altogether. Looking back, I'm amazed that I managed to get away with it. I wouldn't be surprised if others have done something similar, but I sometimes wonder what would have happened if someone had called my bluff. How differently could things have turned out? It's a thought that still crosses my mind from time to time. Story 13. This is a story I've never shared publicly before. I married my ex-boyfriend when he was dying, all to keep his parents from inheriting anything he had left. We met as teenagers in school, and he came out to me, trusting that I would understand. I confessed that I was bisexual and had feelings for him, and from there, we became a couple. It was the best relationship I've ever had. We didn't break up because we wanted to, but because his family moved to South Korea. The time zones and the distance made it impossible to stay together, so we ended things amicably. 10 years later, I had just finished university and was working in finance when I ran into him at a bar. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but it really was him. Late puberty had transformed me so much that he didn't even recognize me at first. When he finally realized who I was, he gave me a hug, and without saying a word, we kissed. We talked all night, and he told me about his life since we'd parted ways. After leaving Korea, he had come out to his parents, but they rejected him completely, blaming him for being gay and pressuring him to enter arranged relationships with women. Eventually, he left Korea to escape their control. I wasn't ready for another relationship at that point, having just gotten out of one, but I let him stay with me while he got back on his feet. A few months later, he had a job in his own place, and things seemed to be going well. Then one night, he called me in a panic, vomiting blood. I rushed him to the hospital, and after weeks of tests, he was diagnosed with stomach cancer. I was with him through it all, treatments, scans, chemo, but nothing worked. Finally, the doctors told us there was nothing more they could do. His parents were aware of his diagnosis, but they used it as an opportunity to double down on their hatred, blaming his illness on his sexuality. He was devastated, but he made it clear he wanted to make sure they wouldn't benefit from his death. A week later, we got married at the courthouse, holding hands with 2 strangers as witnesses. Despite the situation, it was the happiest day of my life. He wrote a will disinheriting his parents, and for the next 5 months, we lived as a married couple. I tried to give him the experiences he'd missed, going on dates, introducing him as my husband at my company's Christmas party, and simply being together. When he passed, it was peaceful. I held his hand all night, knowing it was the end. In the morning, I sent out a message to everyone he knew, letting them know he had passed. At the funeral, his parents showed up, unaware of our marriage. When I was called up to speak as his husband, they were furious. At the reception, they confronted me, cursing me out, but my father and brother intervened and escorted them out. It's been 3 years now, and I've only recently started dating again because I know it's what he would have wanted. Even now, I carry the memories of those final months with me. Despite the pain, being there for him was the greatest privilege of my life. Story 14. I haven't felt a single spark of happiness in years. I keep this to myself because I don't want my family or the people around me to know. I avoid conversations about myself, choosing to stay quiet and detached. But the truth is, it's dark and unbearably lonely. Even when I'm surrounded by people, I feel completely isolated. I once had good things in my life, people I loved deeply and opportunities one cared about. But I let my own inner turmoil destroy it all. Since then, every day has just been something I've needed to survive. I used to laugh at those movie scenes where someone falls apart after losing the love of their life, drowning in takeout boxes and sadness, only for everything to magically resolve by the end.
Real life isn't like that.
Love is more intricate. It's like an organ you carry inside yourself. When it's gone, there's no quick fix. I still feel her presence, like phantom limbs, her legs brushing against mine, sinking into the couch together, the smell of her skin. I'd give anything to have just one more day of that, to experience it all again. If someone offered me a choice between reliving that for a day or taking $1,000, I'd choose her every time. Now, there's no happiness, just distractions, and an overwhelming sense of loss. If I've learned anything, it's this: don't give up on something good. Don't let insecurities or self-doubt destroy something worth holding on to. Story 15. In high school, I saw the school counselor weekly. She was terrible, belittling my experiences and supporting the people who hurt me instead of helping me. I wasn't the only one. There was a small group of us who also saw her, bonded by our shared frustration and disappointment. She was infamous for her dismissive attitude. She'd say things like, "That's not bad enough to get anyone involved," or "Other people have it worse." Her job was to help, but she consistently refused to take action, leaving us all feeling unheard and unsupported. The breaking point came when a sophomore girl, who had been seeing her for months, revealed that she was being physically and sexually abused by her parents. She begged the counselor for help, but as usual, nothing was done. Desperate and out of options, the girl went to the police herself. A rape kit and evidence from her bruises confirmed her story, leading to the arrest of her parents. The news reached the school board before it hit the press. The counselor resigned in shame, and the principal followed suit, claiming he needed time to reevaluate her position in education. Even though the counselor was gone, the damage she caused lingered. Too many people in my grade have died, either from drugs or by their own hand. While I take some solace in knowing she no longer has responsibility over anyone's well-being, it's bittersweet for many of us. Her failure to do her job came too late to fix. I just hope her replacement listens. That small hope is all I can cling to as I reflect on the damage caused by someone who should have been there to help. Story 16. My dad passed away 10 years ago, when I was 15. 7 years later, a family friend who had worked closely with him revealed a secret. My dad had a mistress for many years, even while still married to my mom. According to the friend, my dad loved my mom as the mother of his children, but considered this other woman the love of his life. The woman had passed away 2 years before my dad, so I never got the chance to meet her. To this day, I'm the only one in my family who knows about this, and I have no intention of telling my mom or my older brother. I love my mom and I understand the betrayal, but I can't help but see why it might have happened. When I was about 1 or 2, my dad had to move to another city for work, a 7-hour drive from home. He asked my mom to move the family there, but she refused for reasons that seemed trivial. For nearly 14 years, he worked there Monday to Friday, coming home every weekend. He was also the sole breadwinner, supporting our family while my mom stayed home. I believe he chose not to divorce her because he wanted to give us a stable, normal life. I can understand how lonely and isolated he must have felt during those years. This secret weighs heavily on me, but I've come to terms with it as part of my dad's humanity, flawed, but deeply complex. I'll carry this knowledge alone, as it's not something I ever want to share with my mom or brother. Story 177. For a year, I lied every day to my parents about going to college. I faked everything, editing screenshots of grades, creating fake report cards, and researching class material to keep my story consistent. During dinner conversations, I'd stay quiet and act like everything was normal. I didn't have a car, so during the winter, I'd stay outside for up to 8 hours to avoid being caught. I made money by boosting in League of Legends, a video game I was good at, which allowed me to afford things and keep my parents from questioning my finances. The pressure to succeed, both from my family and for myself, was crushing. School wasn't for me, but instead of admitting that, I created an elaborate lie. Over time, the weight of it all led me into a deep depression. Eventually, my dad discovered the truth when he asked for my college papers to reduce his taxes. I couldn't provide them, and the lie unraveled. I confessed everything, that I hadn't been in college or working for an entire year. To my surprise, my parents didn't kick me out. Instead, they took me to our family doctor, who prescribed medication for my depression. They also supported me by paying for a therapist whom I still see once a month. 7 months later, I thought my family would give up on me, but they didn't. Today, I have a full-time job, bought my first car, and am looking for an apartment, though the prices are overwhelming. I'm incredibly grateful to my friends, siblings, and parents for standing by me through everything. And I'm thankful for myself for not giving up, even when it felt like the darkest times would never end. If you're struggling, don't give up.
Seek help.
People might surprise you with their kindness and support, and one day you'll see the light at the end of the tunnel. Life is worth living. Keep going. Story 18. When I was a kid, my dad used to talk in his sleep. I didn't think much of it at the time, but later, when he had to go to rehab, I asked my mom why he couldn't come home. She told me he had to stay at rehab with his friend. When I asked what rehab was, she said it was a place for people to get better. My young mind interpreted that as him just hanging out with a friend. Fast forward 10 years, and I learned the truth. My dad was a drug addict. My mom used to find him passed out on the bedroom floor while I was at school. I assumed the drugs were why he talked in his sleep, sometimes even full-on arguing with himself. Back then, I was only in first grade, maybe even younger. While he's not on drugs anymore, things haven't improved much. He's been in a wheelchair since before I was a teenager, and now he's emotionally abusive to both my mom and me. He starts fights over anything and everything, keeping us in a constant state of stress. Financially, things are tough, mostly because of him. He refuses to rest until my mom takes him to the hospital for every minor ache or discomfort, draining money we don't have. He doesn't see that he's the reason we have to live so carefully. For example, my allowance doesn't even come from my parents. It comes from my aunt. Even though he's no longer using drugs, the damage they cause still lingers, affecting all of us in different ways. Story 19. I don't tell the woman I live with about a lot of the problems I handle. She tends to get very worked up, worrying herself sick over even small issues, so I deal with them quietly behind the scenes. 2 years ago, we replaced the roof on our house. While working on it, I found some rotted planks and a few other concerning issues. If I told her, she likely would have convinced herself that the entire roof was about to cave in. Instead, I replaced all the bad wood and reassured her it was just a cosmetic fix. 4 years ago, we hired professionals to complete major structural repairs under the house. The work was thorough and resolved the problem permanently, but she still believes it's only a matter of time before the house becomes unsafe again. I do the same when it comes to my health. Earlier this year, I had kidney stones, but I told her it was just an upset stomach. Right now, I have shingles, but she thinks it's a minor rash. If I were honest about these things, her anxiety would skyrocket. She'd ask endless questions, making it harder for me to manage the situation. Hiding the truth isn't ideal, but it keeps her calm and allows me to focus on solving problems without added stress. Sometimes, it feels like the best way to keep the peace and protect her from unnecessary worry. Story 20. I was about 10 years into my career as a long-haul truck driver. Over the years, I'd seen plenty of accidents, some truly horrific, and even been in a few myself. But there's one I'll never forget. It was around 10 o'clock at night, with a clear sky and bright moonlight. I was heading home with about 100 miles left to go, driving along a winding, isolated highway through the woods. Around a bend, I noticed tire tracks leading off the road. They looked old, but something nagged at me, telling me to stop and check it out. I pulled over, grabbed my flashlight and my pistol because out in the middle of nowhere, you never know what you'll run into. I followed the tracks down a steep ravine and found an 18-wheeler, crushed and crumpled like a tin can. It had tumbled down the hill and was lying on its side with a small fire burning near the cab. I started to back away, fearing the fire might reach the gas tank. I assumed no one could have survived the crash anyway. But then I heard it, a man's voice calling for help. I rushed to the cab and found the driver pinned inside. Metal and glass were crushing his body, and he was bleeding badly. He was trapped so completely that there was no way to get him out. That's when I saw the gasoline, glistening in the moonlight, slowly spreading toward the fire. It was only a matter of time before it reached the gas. There was no stopping it, no saving this man. He realized it too. His eyes locked onto mine, wild with terror, and he begged me to kill him. He didn't want to burn alive. My pistol was tucked into the back of my pants. I pulled it out and raised it, but I couldn't do it. I grew up reading the good book, believing in God's commandments, and I just couldn't take his life. My hands shook as the man screamed, pleading for me to end his suffering. Please, God, just kill me. I don't want to die like this. And then the gasoline ignited. Everything in me screamed to run, to escape the horrific scene. But something held me there. If I couldn't save him, at least I wouldn't let him die alone. So, I stood there frozen, watching as the flames consumed him. I listened to his screams until they stopped, the fire crackling in the quiet night. I stayed there until the sun rose. Then, I climbed back up the ravine, called in the accident over my radio, and drove the rest of the way home to my wife and 6 kids. I never told anyone what happened. I kept it bottled up for 40 years. I never explained to my wife why I woke up screaming in the middle of the night, or why I struggled so much with my faith. I carried the guilt alone. Guilt for not saving him, and guilt for being relieved it wasn't me. One night, decades later, I was driving with my youngest daughter, who was an adult by then. For no reason at all, I told her the story. Maybe the night reminded me of that terrible one so long ago, but the words just spilled out. I expected her to hate me, to see me as a coward who let a man burn. But instead, she cried for me. When we stopped the car, she held me as I cried too. It was the first time I'd let myself feel that pain with another person. Now, I'm an old man, and I don't know what will happen to me when I die. I still carry that guilt, and always will, not just for watching that man burn, but for being so grateful it wasn't me. Story 21. One day, in early high school, I went to a dentist appointment and realized I needed to use the bathroom. At this office, you had to ask the front desk for a key to the restroom. I grabbed it, went to the bathroom, and did my business. But when I flushed, the water level started rising, and it didn't stop. I stood there frozen in panic as the water spilled over the edge of the toilet and onto the floor. I had no idea what to do, so I bolted. I dropped the key off at the front desk, and just as I did, the dentist called me back to the chair. As I sat there, my heart pounding, the dentist worked on my mouth. Then, a receptionist came in, announcing that the bathroom was flooding. There was water everywhere. The dentist left the room to check it out, leaving me mortified. By the time he came back, I was red-faced and sweating, terrified he'd figured out I was the culprit. But then he started casually explaining how a toilet works, how it can clog and overflow if certain parts malfunction. I couldn't tell if he knew it was me and was messing with me, or if it was just a coincidence. The appointment finally ended, and I braced myself as I walked out of the room, expecting someone to stop me or call me out. But no one said a word. I passed by the bathroom, which was now blocked off, with water flowing down the stairs to the first floor. I left the office as fast as I could, completely unpunished. To this day, I don't know if anyone realized it was me, or if they genuinely thought it was the toilet's fault. Either way, I got away with it and I'm not complaining. Story 22, I was relentlessly bullied by twin sisters for years, from elementary school through the first year of high school. We were in the same classes, rode the same bus, and lived in the same small town. No matter how hard I tried to be nice to them or avoid them when they were having a bad day, it didn't stop. The bullying got so bad that I'd feel physically sick just waiting at the bus stop. I even thought about ending my life because of how miserable they made me. During our first year of high school, we went on a field trip to a mountain park. After some activities, we had lunch on top of a tall hill overlooking the park. One of the sisters and her friends wandered closer to the edge of the cliff. While they were laughing and goofing around, she turned her back to the drop. I watched as her sandal got caught in a loose branch on the ground. She lost her balance and fell off the cliff. It took her friends a few moments to realize what had happened. I stood there silently, watching the whole thing, saying nothing. She was badly injured and had to leave school for the rest of the year. I remember feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction, especially seeing her sister cry on the bus ride home. I thought about all the times I'd cried because of them, and for once, I felt like the universe had evened the score. Even though I didn't cause her fall, I've always felt guilty for taking pleasure in her pain. When people asked me if I saw what happened, I lied and said I hadn't seen anything. I couldn't bring myself to admit that, deep down, I had secretly hoped she'd been hurt. It's a memory that still makes me feel conflicted to this day.
1.